All right, welcome everyone to Farmer Angel Network's monthly education event. My name is Amanda Kura. I'm the Human Development and Relationships Educator for Sauk County. I'll be hosting this afternoon's event along with one of our agricultural partners. And I'm just going to walk us through a few housekeeping issues here this afternoon, and of course we've got a few people joining us, so bear with me here as I deal with the technology as well. All right, so just a few participant reminders to get us started before I hand it over to this month's host. We want everyone to share their experience. It helps others to learn and reach out for help and resources. That's one of the big reasons why we do these education events. Please, we ask that you share only what you're comfortable with in a public setting. As you will know, based on the fact that I just hit the record button, we are recording these sessions. We do share them to public sites for Farmer Angel Network. Sometimes we do also get requests to share these recordings with some of our partners to extend the message that our providers are helping us with in terms of public health, mental health message. So in terms of what we're talking about today, please only share what you're comfortable with. But when you do share, it does help others want to reach out and be part of the messaging of Farmer Angel Network as well. So we appreciate that. These sessions, again, are recorded. They'll be posted to social media, and the purpose of that is to connecting others to this information regarding the agricultural community, positive mental health, and well-being resources. And just to kind of emphasize that Farmer Angel Network supports SAMHSA's model of the 8 dimensions of wellness. So if you're interested in a little bit more in that model, we would certainly ask you to go to SAMHSA's website. That's SAMSAHA website and learn more about the 8 dimensions of wellness. If at any point in time the Farmer Angel Network, its members, or the presenter feel that a learner needs some additional support or resources, we will take responsibility for reaching out and providing that information post-session. We want to make sure that everyone feels supported and well as a result of today's presentation. And so we want to make sure that everybody has all the available resources. So before we get into introduction of our presenter, I'm going to hand it over to Jay, and Jay is going to tell us a little bit about his connection to Farmer Angel Network and our topic presenter today.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I want to thank Dorothy Harms for inviting me to do this. Jay Salinas, I am an artist and farmer, and I am co-founder of an organization called Worm Farm Institute, whose mission is to integrate culture and agriculture. Dorothy asked me to share a few words about what we do and our connection to the Farmer Angel Network, which is a couple different ways. So I'll do that quickly. So we've been working with Dorothy for almost a decade now. One of our big projects is called the Farm Art Detour, which is in its 8th or 9th year now, started in 2010-11, a 50-mile drive through the beautiful working lands of Sauk County, punctuated by temporary site-specific sculpture, and also the farmland and the working lands and the work that farmers do every day. We engage farmers to share what it is that they do with our public, which is averages about 15,000 people each time we mount this event. And so there's an opportunity for interactions that would not necessarily occur otherwise. We have provided space for the Farmer Angel Network to table at our event and share the message. And we think that's really effective, and we're honored to be a part of that. Also, I have another hat that I wear. I am on the board of an organization called the Food, Faith, and Farming Network. And in that capacity, we have a small grant program called Seed Money, and where we try to support worthy efforts throughout, in this case, southwestern Wisconsin. And we're very happy to support Farmer Angel Network in this past year for their the drive-in movie night. So also real quickly, one more thing. I have before we started here, I have a connection with our guest today, Mr. Smith. And one of the other programs that Worm Farm Institute does is we host an artist residency program on a working organic farm. For the past almost 30 years, I have been raised organic vegetables and marketed primarily through CSA, but also we host artists who come to our farm every year to work on the farm, be inspired by life in the country, and then create in response to that. And Dan's son, Austin, who is a brilliant poet, was here about 10 years ago, contributed mightily temporarily to the culture of our community, and now has gone on to bigger and better things. The Farm Art Detour is a biennial. It will take place in the October 1st through 10th of 2022 this year. It'll be the same route we had last year, which is between Sauk Prairie on the east and Plain on the west, with a lot of concentration of activity taking place in Whitland. We are working right now to engage farmers along the route to share what it is they do, and also to host art installation on their farm. So really, again, honored to be here. The work that you guys do is so necessary, supporting the few who feed the many. I'm honored to be a sort of a partial member of the fraternity of farmers, growing food for people to eat. There's no more important activity than that on earth, and seeing to all manner of health of those who perform that vital function is critically important. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for this opportunity, and look forward to hearing the talk.
Excellent. Thank you. Get our screen back up here. All right, so without further ado, I would like to introduce Dan Smith, who is a farmer, poet, author, and director at DATCP. And just a little bit further introduction regarding Daniel Smith. He is an accomplished poet, essayist, public speaker, and agribusiness executive with a lifelong commitment to agriculture, the environment, and rural communities. Mr. Smith has operated his family's dairy farm in Northwest Illinois for 3 decades with his wife Cheryl, where they raised their sons Austin, Ryan, and Levi. With the practicality of a farmer and the syntax of a poet, he has authored 3 books of poetry titled Homeland, from Bottom Dog Press, Fatherland from the Longhouse Press, and Ancestral, which is from Water's Edge Press. His poems and essays have appeared nationwide in such publications as Narrative, Midwest Gothic, Seams, Tundra, Midwest Quarterly, among others. Smith currently serves as president and CEO of Cooperative Network and as a director of the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, where he has directed the state's domestic international agricultural marketing programs. He is the former CEO of Midwest BioAg, a national farm supply company, and a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He and his wife Cheryl live on a small farm in the Driftless region of southwestern Wisconsin, where he writes, and together they enjoy reading, hiking, and their grandchildren. And with that, I hand it over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for having me here today. It's really an honor to be with you. The work that you do is so important and so appreciated. Thank you for everything that you do for this industry that we all know so well, and it demands so much of us. And that's really one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today. We could be on a webinar at any time discussing agricultural economics or farm management practices or soil conservation, all these things that go into agriculture. What we're going to talk about today is what I call the culture of agriculture. And there is a reason the word culture is in the word agriculture. And I'm not sure we're giving enough attention and consideration to the heritage and the culture that makes us all work so hard in an industry that demands so much of us and really is very painful for a lot of people when they hit kind of the down cycle of agriculture and have to work through these things. When I wrote Ancestral, it's a lifelong effort. The oldest poem in the book is almost 50 years old, written when I was in high school. And the newest poem is just a couple months old. And it really spans my entire life in agriculture in several different forms, primarily as a farmer, but later after retiring from farming in 2008 as an agribusiness executive. And then my first role at DATCP was actually as a farm crisis counselor, working with farmers across the state through the Farm Center on any type of personal, financial, management crisis that they were having. And their voices and their stories are reflected in these poems as well. When I look at agriculture and all this common ground that we all share as those who work in agriculture, I really see it as a journey that has three primary experiences. The first really being growing up on a farm, being indoctrinated into the farming life, basically falling in love with farming. And we do that at a very early age because of the combination of home and business, of the farm being right outside the family home, around the family home. It's very unique. That doesn't happen to a doctor who goes off to the clinic or the hospital every day and can't take his kids with him all day. It doesn't happen to a businessman where your kids are in the business meetings all day, but it happens in family farming. It's all hands on deck from a very early age. And we fall in love with that farming. And then as we get older and can make our own decisions in life, many of us make the decision that we're going to continue that. We're going to sign up for a job where sometimes the pay is low, the hours are always long, there's a lot of ups and downs. The vacuum pump may break on Christmas morning, but we're okay with that because this agreement that we've made, this love that we have fallen in with the land and the family and the work is so strong. And then when you go to the third experience, as you get older, you hit what I call the 30-year wall. It becomes more difficult to do the work. There's succession questions coming up for the farm. There could be financial issues. The farm needs constant reinvestment. And you get to that latter part of farming. Balancing all three of those into one life is very, very difficult and very challenging. And that's why I named the book Ancestral. It really follows that entire path of those three experiences in an industry that is constantly changing and requires that us as farmers and people are constantly changing as well. So I started farming full-time after graduating from college in 1978 on the family farm near Freeport, Illinois. And in 1978, there were 47,700 licensed dairy farms in Wisconsin. Today, there are about 6,600. So we've lost over 41,000 family dairy farms in the span of my career, one person's career. And that's had a tremendous impact on our rural communities, our rural school districts, our rural businesses, how we see our Wisconsin as the dairy state. Put a lot of stress on our natural resources, but it really requires that as the industry has moved, so many farm families have had to make these same decisions. So the poems I'm going to share with you today are obviously my poems and my story, but I also don't quite see it that way. I see it as the story of very many of those 41,000 farmers who have sold their cows and exited the business or transitioned their operations to some other type over the course of the last 40 years. There's a saying that it's not wiffle ball, and it isn't. It's tough to make those type of changes. The emotional turbulence that I went through of leaving ancestral land, of quitting the work that I had done. I was 55 years old when I left farming, and fit in that farm and that work was the only thing I ever knew except the 4 years I spent at the University of Wisconsin. And to make the decision that we were going to transition to something else is not something that can be taken lightly. And I know a lot of the farmers that you help and you work with, and the Farm Center from DATCP works with, they're struggling with those types of decisions. And I will be very happy if these poems can shed some light on that and really help people to understand where we come from, what farming requires from us, and then where we move on from here. One of the things that I have always tried to stress in my presentations to farmers is that you can love more than one place. You can love more than one way of life. Leaving the farm to me no way diminishes the 55 years I spent on that farm. I gave it everything that I had, and I made the decision with my family to move to a second type of a life. And I hope that not only my poems, but the stories of the farm families that I work with at the Farm Center that are in this book will really help when people read it and say that they see that path forward. Because we all only have one life to live. And it's our responsibility to make the very, very best of that life. Eventually, time moves on. Agriculture is constantly changing, and we need to make decisions on how we stay involved in agriculture, how we maybe move our operations around a little bit, or we exit agriculture and transition to other type of life. The goal is to always have your options in front of you and to go through life with a positive attitude looking forward. And I hope that these poems will help that. So let's read a few of the poems, and then I'll talk about what they meant to me and how I wrote them and why I think they support what I just shared with you, those three experiences. So I thought we would start off with a poem that starts in childhood on the farm, but really ends up today in my new home in Iowa County, Wisconsin, off that farm. It really transcends that entire life experience. And it's called Father's Day. I watched my father when I was a boy. I watched my father and followed my father all morning through chores, the long morning chores leading into the day's farm work and field work. I watched my father and followed my father, and at high noon, I followed him in to wait behind him at the wash tub in the old farmhouse. He used tough bars of lava soap and a horse bristle brush clean up to his elbows, his sunburnt arms red and hay chaff specked, the hot scrubbing before the cold water rinse of the morning's work, be it cattle or crop, metal or wood. I watched and followed my father all those years, and now decades have passed since I touched his hand. I live on land my father never saw, miles and miles from all we knew. Each morning I rise to the barn and fields. These chores I do to keep me sane. Come noon, I am the man at the wash tub, lathering and rinsing, lathering and rinsing. To me, that poem could have been written by any child who grew up on a farm and learned how to follow his father or his grandfather or his mother or his grandmother in the work of the farm, that indoctrination into the farm, that falling in love, as I said, with a farm, and how you carry that the rest of your life. And even though my father has passed away, I'm no longer working with him, and I no longer live on that land, the conclusion that I am doing the same things that I was taught at this time of my life in a later stage of my life on new land my father never saw, as I wrote, but repeating that. That's the heritage of farming. That's the culture of farming. And it could be seen as something that we have to struggle to carry with us, or it can be seen as a blessing. And I prefer to see it as a blessing. And I think if we see it that way, it's much easier to handle moving forward. Another poem, and you'll notice that my father is in a lot of these poems, and I farmed with my father for most of my life, so that would be obvious. This poem was written in the 1990s when my father and I were farming full-time together at that time. It was written during a very wet period in this one spring. And I love this poem because some of these poems where you capture a day or something somebody said are almost like written photographs. You know how you look back through a photograph album, you can remember that day or that person or that trip that you took or that horse that you had when you were a child or something like that. To me, my poems do the same thing. So if I hadn't written this poem back in the 90s after this particular day, I probably wouldn't have that memory. But they lock in these times, and that's why I think it's so important for me to write is to capture those things. And this poem is called Wet Spring. 2 weeks now, we haven't turned a wheel. The moldboard and disc rust in the rain. Tractors idle in the cold sheds as all day the fields gather beneath seamless clouds. 1 year ago, the corn stood ankle high. Sitting on a sack of seed, my father, 5 decades of farming, swears if we still farmed with horses, we'd have this crop in the ground. The rest of the day, tinkering with cold engines while the rain worked the tin roof. I hold this picture in my mind. My father, at my age, the sun in his hair, check planting corn behind a dapple gray mare. It's another poem that pays homage to the transfer of knowledge from father to son, from one generation to another, the passage of time, the changes in technology and farming. My father thinking that, reflecting that they could have gotten in the fields earlier when you farmed with horses than with heavy equipment. And then I remember him saying that and wrote that poem that night to try to capture that. And here we are all these years later, still remembering that day. But with the passing of time in almost every family farm, the responsibility and the decision-making and how the farm operates passes from one generation to another. And the next poem that I'm going to share with you really deals with when I was farming basically on my own later on in my career. And it points out the fact that I think it's human nature that we resist change. That if we're loving what we do and we're comfortable in what we do, we don't want to look up and see that someday it may be otherwise. And this is something that as a crisis counselor at the Farm Center, I always try to relay to farm families that I worked with. Be aware of change. Be aware that the person you are when you're 60 is not the person you were when you were 30. You're going to have different values. Your body's going to be different. Your mind's going to be different. Your goals for the rest of your life are going to be different. And those around you will be different. Families are not, locked in objects. Families change. Spouses come. Sometimes spouses leave. There's a whole organic cycle of life around a farm. And what I tried to capture in this poem was how closely I held to one way of life for so long, though there was kind of the premonition or subconscious realization that it wasn't always going to be this way, but I might have been afraid to really look at that. And I always tell farmers, make sure you're looking ahead. Don't just look behind. Don't just look at the day's work that has to be done. Look ahead. And this is called cultivating. Day after day, year in and year out, I never left my father's farm. Wore down dirt, a straight path from house to barn. Opened each day with pocket knife and pliers, the ways my father taught me. Out on the blacktop, men raced breakneck speed to jobs in town, to worlds apart from what could be measured, from what could be held close. While I steered the old red tractor, carefully cultivating my narrow rows, 2 hands on the wheel, eyes tucked back beneath my wide-brimmed hat, so not to rise up, look ahead, and veer off course into today. That poem that captures how you learn to be a farmer and how fortunate you feel to be a farmer when men are driving by and the blacktop past the farm, as I said, 2 worlds apart from what could be measured or what could be held close. You feel so lucky that you have this world of the family farm. And you're so fortunate that you're not one of those men who's commuting into town to an office job. That's the way I felt all those years. And you keep 2 hands on the wheel and you're doing your cultivating, and you have your hat on and you don't want to look up and realize that someday that row is going to turn and you're going to have to figure out some other way to live. And being open to that and being open to the reality of life's changes, I think is the key to doing so. As I moved on, and I'll readily admit that I think I hit kind of what I call the 30-year wall in agriculture, where I was, physically worn out, probably stressed out, and decided at age 55 that there was another generation wasn't coming on the farm. The farm was going to require a great deal of reinvestment to keep it going as a dairy farm. And then I wanted to find new opportunities for the rest of my working career and my life. This poem called Farmwork really captures that stress. And I think we have to be aware of how stressful farming is. And I know you are all aware of that because you work with farmers every day. It takes a lot. It takes a lot physically, it takes a lot of management, it takes a tremendous commitment. And year after year, especially if you're doing a lot of that work by yourself, it can really start to wear you down a little bit. This is called farm work. This pretty much sums up how I felt towards the end of my farming career. Farm work. Day follows day over this land like water, downstream over rock, sand, sediment. All a man can do is put one foot before the other, pull his hat down tight. Each spring, the frost heaved stones rise from the plowing, point to all that needs doing. Then from season to season, I live as wire pulled taut from post to post. Beneath in the tall grass, whole worlds slip by, felt but never seen. That analogy to why as living as wire pulled taut from post to post is, I think, the way a lot of farmers feel like when things get really tough on a farm, that you're almost to the breaking point. And you think a wire pulled between 2 posts so taut that if anything happens, it's just going to snap. And that's what I tried to picture in that poem, and it's not a real happy poem. It's not a poem that celebrates the joy of cultivation or agriculture, but I do think it's a realistic poem. One of the poems in the book that has brought the most comment from other farmers, probably the poem that has really captured farmers, especially those who are older, still on the farm, whose kids have moved off into other things, is this next poem. And I think it shows that there's a lot of people that feel this way, because I've had so many of them come up. I gave a reading in Spring Green and there were probably 40 people in the audience. And I had 2 farmers come up afterwards and said that one poem about chasing shores is exactly how I feel. This is called Chasing Shores. Sun on the south porch, the dog dozing beneath. Late September. The dry weeds rustle as the old mare limps from hot sun to box elder shade. The year's hay now in the barn, the garden gone to seed, and no one home to notice. Years back, 3 families farmed 700 acres, milked dawn and dusk, 7 days a week. My boys pulled on big boy boots, chased chores sunup to sundown. Now some lives laid to rest, others starting up in faraway cities. Well, here on land that still stays home. I've stayed to chase these chores alone. Each spring grinding down, spring to fall, a bit harder than the last. An image of the world moving on, the next generation may be moving on. No one around to the vitality of the farm that it once was when you were younger, or the farm was growing, or those types of things, is what I captured in that poem. And that's another poem that I can remember the day that I wrote it. And it's very, very factual. It was late September. I was watching the horse in the pasture. The kids were off to college. No one was home. My parents had passed on. And it leaves you with that kind of sense of, okay, we've done all this great work. Where do we go from here? You're really at that fork in the road, at that point in your life. After we sold our cows in 2007, sold our farm in 2008, and relocated to a small farm in Iowa County, which we feel very fortunate about because we really love it. But I'm not going to lie to you, it was tough. It's tough to leave Ancestral home and start over. It's easier for me now, 12 years later, than it was then. But those first couple years were pretty tough. You have to kind of push through them. I was lucky enough to find new rewarding career and keep me busy. But when we first moved here, the first poem that I wrote was called Anvil. And Anvil goes like this. I've hauled my father's anvil due north up out of the black Illinois farm ground. He and I together worked decades our home. Set down 60 pounds onto the floor of this old barn, new only to me. All around our bewildered tools hang in the strange light of the cracked window pane, where I stand looking out over land not yet home. It is growing late on a late winter's day. At my feet, my father's anvil, his striking song of steel on steel, still hammering home. Another poem similar to that one that I wrote when we had moved to a new place, and as I said, I was 55 when we moved here. And for the first time in 55 years, I wasn't living on the farm near Freeport. And this poem is called Landmarks, and it just addresses how when you move physically, there's a lot of emotions and a lot of effort that has to go into making that new place a home and to recognize the landmarks. And this is called Landmarks. I have moved a whole huge part of my life into the past. Loaded up a half century of gathering, set out north to this little patch of stony soil. All around, the hills loom strange to a flatlander. Just now, the rain begins. The wind bends low the pines. And I, at the window, begin again, searching the vast valley for my long lost landmarks. That sense that we were in a new place, but I was looking for those familiar landmarks to ground me. Eventually, you get through those things. And I think it's important for farmers. The average age of the farmer in Wisconsin now is in his late 60s. We're down to 6,500 dairy farms. Who knows how many we'll have in a couple of years. A lot of farmers are going to have to, reset their landmarks. Realize that you can love more than one way of life. You can love more than one place to live, more than one way to live. If these poems have value, I hope those are the emotions that they will share. One of the best things that I could have done was to work as a crisis counselor for the Farm Center when I started, because I had instant credibility with the farm families that I work with, because I had gone through it. I had made these decisions to leave the farm. I had worked through financial difficulties, weather difficulties, broken equipment. I had farmed in a family operation with all the stress that that brings. So I could meet with farm families across the state and talk to them about these things. And this poem that I'm going to share for you now is from one of those visits. And it was one of those visits that I kind of felt guilty for even getting paid that day because it was such a gift to meet this gentleman. He was a bachelor farmer, and he called the farm center and he wanted somebody to come out and look at his estate plan. So I got the fortunate job of going out to do so. But quickly after arriving there, I realized his estate plan was in excellent shape. But what he really wanted was somebody to talk to. And all I had to do was listen. So I listened and I took notes. And I was there for about 2 hours. One thing I can't do with you today is to give you those 2 hours of how long it took him to tell me these stories. But it literally took him 2 hours to tell what I'm going to tell you in the next 3 minutes. There were a lot of times when there was just silence, where we just looked out the window at the farm. I didn't speak and he didn't speak. It made me realize that you don't always have to have the answer. You don't always have to be talking. Sometimes you just have to listen and let somebody else tell you what's important to them. And I thought it was really, this poem really came to me as a gift. It's called In the Fall of My Life, Words of a Bachelor Farmer. My grandparents gifted me this farm. I call it a gift. My mother called it a curse. I loved my grandparents. Like I said, they gave me this farm. Grandpa taught me how to do everything. I remember eating breakfast with them at 6:30 every morning right here at this table. I remember what they sounded like, and I remember what they smelled like. And I am only here because of how hard they worked all their lives. People say I never married, but they are wrong. I married the farm. I'm old now. I got my Social Security card the day they killed Kennedy. I remember that day. I will always remember that day. For 35 years, I had all I needed: tractors, tools, and cows. I always let the hired man off for Christmas. I stayed here with the cows. I did the work. 25 years in a row, I never saw my family at Christmas. I ate Christmas dinner late at night right here, alone at this table after I was done with the milking. Earl came here as my hired man and stayed 16 years. He could do anything. He could turn a lot of ground black in a day. Toward the end, we used a stepladder to get him up on the tractor. He would stay there all day, mowing or plowing or whatever. He would pee right off the tractor. When he died, it felt like I had lost a brother. I loved November when the corn was picked, the barn tightened up for the winter. But toward the end, each year I got to wondering, do I have another year in me? I am in the fall of my life. I sold my cows in 2011. I enjoyed my cows while I had them. It was a good experience. My cows were my family. My brother and I don't get along. He is a handsome man, very Hollywood, had a couple wives, but he is no happier than I am. My dad had a little dog and he would bring him here and the dog would spook my cows. I asked my dad to leave that dog at home, but he refused. So one day I told my dad not to come here anymore. We finally made up, but I didn't see my dad for years. One day in November, we were filling silo and we ran late. I always milk late, but that night it was after 9 when I finished milking. When I got done and the pipeline was washing, I thought to sit on a bale of hay and just take a little rest. I was just so tired. I woke in the middle of the night, still on that bale of hay. I knew right then the cows had to go. I was just so tired. I want happiness. I really do. I want to fit in. I am an outcast. I want to fit into society. You are better off with a gal on your arm. I never had that, but people think better of you if you are married. They really do. I have lived a selfish life. I just took care of myself and the farm. I never raised a kid. I have lots of cash in the bank, but I should have. I never spent anything on anyone. Give me a day with the sun shining and the wind blowing and me up on the farm all pulling the hay baler. The bales tight and of good quality, flying up into the wagon. Good tight bales of decent quality. You can't beat that. You really can't. I went in for my yearly checkup. They looked in my ears and eyes and down my throat. They asked me questions. Then they said I was depressed. I know I'm depressed. Tell me something I don't know. Say, do you have a card you can leave me? I might want to call you sometime. I know you are a busy man, but you seem to understand. You know, don't you? I think as we work with an aging farm population, they won't all have exactly this situation, but I think the emotions and the feelings and the fears, the regret, the melancholy is something that we all need to learn if we're going to help farmers get through these times. Learn that. And I just have such a great respect for a farmer who on the 5 minutes after he met me for the first time in his life could be that open and talk like that. And those are really rare opportunities to really help somebody. I'm going to conclude now with one more poem, and then I'm happy to have a discussion or take your questions or whatever direction you'd like to go. And I thought some about, well, I think I'll read two more poems because there's one poem that I like to kind of leave as a wish for all of us. But before I get to that one, I wanted to read you this poem because it really captures not only the span of time and how farming has changed, but no matter where we go in life, whether you grow up on a farm and you never farm and you move off, I don't care if you move to Manhattan, you carry so much of what you experience as a child on the farm with you. Now, if you stay on the farm and you farm for another 30, 40, or 50 years, obviously it's going to be very, very intense. But I think all people, once you grow up on a farm, once you've been exposed to a family farm, especially here in the Midwest, you carry that with you and it will come back in this, and often with just this, anything that can trigger a memory. And that's what I captured in this poem. It's called Driving Home. I passed a small herd of black Angus, standing broad shoulder to broad shoulder, heads bent to their evening feed, the first flakes of a big snow beginning to fall. It took me back to my father in the 50s on the farm in northwestern Illinois. He bought Western feeder calves, wide-eyed and green right off the range, fed them out on silage and grain in a dirt lot back of the barn. When fattened, shipped them off to the big stockyards in Chicago, steaks for businessmen on Michigan Avenue. He rode the train in to watch them sell and bring back the check, money for new shoes, coats, schooling for 8 kids. My father gone now 20 years. No one farms that way anymore. They tore the stockyards out. Still, those cattle in a Wisconsin field bring it all back. One of those things we carry and find impossible to leave behind, no matter where we are, how we live, who we've become. I think a lot of people who grew up on farms, people who visited their grandparents on a farm, would relate to that poem. That there are some things you simply carry with you, no matter where you live. They're inherent in who you are and how you see the world. So I'll leave you with this poem now that I also see as kind of a prayer. And I think it's very timely when you look at the tornado damage in Kentucky and the other states. When you look at the school shootings in Oxford, Michigan, how quickly, life can be one way in the morning and be totally different at night in the course of a day. And this poem is called The Day. How abruptly change appears, dressed as wildfire leaping the divide, or the armed intruder in the hall, or the drunk driver failing to stop. So the norm is now respite, the blessed day, the day that ends as it began. Everything you love, intact, at peace, safely home. So as we head into the holidays, that's my wish for all of you, that everything you love is intact, at peace, and safely home. I think that is our wish for our farming communities and our fellow man. So thank you for letting me share the poems from Ancestral today. Ancestral can be purchased from Water's Edge Press, or you can visit my website at danielgerardsmith.com, or your local bookstore should have it. And of course, if you want, it is available on Amazon, but I hope you'll support your local bookstore. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
So we'll open it up now to questions, comments, feedback to our speaker. So you're welcome to type it in the chat or just unmute, whatever you're more comfortable with. And I see a comment from Dorothy that she had to head out a little bit earlier, but she wanted to thank you for your meaningful poetry that you shared with us today, Dan.
Of course.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you, Dan. Your reference and remembrance of the experiences that we had in the Wisconsin Farm Center really rang home. I think we all have similar stories of farmers that we worked with, and your poems just captured those feelings perfectly. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think
Hello, Dan.
oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in and ask a quick logistical question. How in the world did you keep track of all of your poems for all of these years?
Just the old fashioned way, type them out on pieces of paper and had them in a loose leaf binder, and then the first book came out in 97. So I had a lot of the poems up from 97 were in that first book. And then Fatherland came out in about 2008, but that was just a very short chapbook of poems. And then when I started putting together the new poems into a collection for Water's Edge Press, they expressed the willingness and the desire to do a full collection. So then we went all the way back and we got the poems from, the first poem the oldest poem in the book is Between Generations. And I wrote that when I was a junior in high school. And then the latest, most recent poem in the book is titled Two, and that was just written a couple months ago. And we kind of spanned everything through. So Thanks for the question, Jen.
Dan, I know you said that you felt like being able to talk to that bachelor farmer was a gift to you, but that 2 hours you spent with him was also a gift to him, because we don't value that, how much that can mean to people. And in our jobs, when you think about what you were doing at the farm center, and Angie was there too, and what I do in extension, we're always having to figure out how to document our impact. So how do you document that impact when that 2 hours was a gift?
Yeah. You know, I still hear from a different farmer who is still farming. And I think I first worked with him in 2009. And he'll still call me 3 or 4 times a year, usually on bad days. And, you know, I can't fix anything for him, but I can listen. And sometimes that's enough. With the bachelor farmer, there wasn't a whole lot that he needed other than company and somebody to listen to him so that he could tell his life story. And I still check in with him once in a while. So I think these long relationships, they're difficult to put on a spreadsheet or to grade a 1 to 10 or turn in a report, you know, to the administration on. But you're making a big difference. When Extension or the Farm Center or anybody who simply stops to talk to people who are struggling, it makes a big difference. And we probably need that more now than we ever have.
And in some ways, you said, you know, you'd met him for, 5 or 10 minutes before you started telling your story. But when you think about it, sometimes that's easier, right?
Yeah,
Than
right.
telling it to someone that you're going to see again.
Yeah. And you haven't got that, a lot of background that you have to live up to. It's a fresh
Right.
clean slate. I agree. I see what you're saying.
Because I feel the same way. It's like every time I meet with a farm family or we have some sort of small peer group meeting, it amazes me how quickly farmers will open up when they are comfortable that there's going to be a confidentiality piece to it, and they just start sharing. And it doesn't take them long when they feel like someone's listening and it's safe. So
Right. I gave a reading here an in-person reading. I've only had a couple of those. And it was to a group in southern Wisconsin. It was a noon luncheon. And afterwards, when I opened it up to questions, one of the ladies in the audience started to ask a question, but then she broke down and cried and she couldn't finish her question. And I didn't really know what to do because she didn't stop crying. And then another woman got up in the audience and went over and sat with her. And she said, "I'm sorry, I can't ask my question." So I said, "Why don't you and I talk afterwards?" So after everybody left, she and I sat and we talked for almost an hour. And it was, these poems have opened the floodgates a little bit. And they were extremely stressed at home, milking a lot of cows, no help, a lot of bills, the thing that we see all the time. And she, and my recommendation to her as I was leaving that day, I said, "I really think you need to call the farm center and have somebody come down." And she said, "There's no way my husband will call somebody from the state and talk to them." And all I could say was, well, maybe he won't today, but maybe he will in January, maybe he will in June, maybe he will in 2 years. But just keep encouraging him to talk, because what she got out of it was, that by accident, we ran into each other and that I would talk to her. And she didn't have that at home. So I think as long as the farm center is there, as long as Extension is there, as long as people working in the in this field, in the mental health field, in the support field are there, there's always the possibility that that door will open. And I understand her husband wasn't going to make that call today, but he might eventually. And she, I gave her my book and told her to take the book home, and she said she was going to try to get him to read it. When I read in Spring Green, a farm couple, when I was sitting at a table signing books after, and there was quite a few people sitting in line, a farm couple came up and they sat down at the table, and everybody else just held out their book and I signed it and they moved on. They sat down and they wanted to talk. I mean, right there, 4 generations on a farm, had sold the cows. Now they had beef cows. They didn't know what to do next, where to go. Again, it's great for me to say I've worked with the farm center. I vouch for the farm center. Call your extension agent, reach out to people to get some help, because that reaching out, that's the first step. And a lot of people are afraid to do that. As I said, I'm always leery to make it seem like, you can farm and you can sell the farm and you can move off and you can do something else and everything is just fine. It was not that way. I had a really, really difficult time for a long time. Time is a great healer. I've been very, very fortunate in my post-farm opportunities to do that. One of the reasons we moved towards Madison was we knew we would have more opportunities for me to get a second career than we would have had on the farm in Freeport, just to get near state government or get near the university or get to agribusiness opportunities like that. But those decisions, they come with a cost. And it isn't, I never want this book to appear to be like everything. I did this, it was easy, anybody can do it. It isn't that way. It takes work.
Okay, I'll jump in here a second. I had a few comments to make, but then I just listening to the discussion, it brings to the forefront how important the work of the Farmer Angel Network is, providing that venue for where farmers can share their stories and then get access to the resources that will help. Really, really powerful words. I wanted to thank you for sharing your experience and wisdom and really beauty with us too. It makes me, I'm only lately coming around to poetry, as it were, but really appreciate the idea of like a poem as a distilled experience. And, yeah, you really captured that, and you really got me with the bachelor poem. That was really especially resonant with me. So thank you very much, and I really loved listening to you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions for our speaker this afternoon?
Just thank you very much. That was very moving.
Thank you.
All right, then with that, I would just like to thank Dan for his presentation today. It was very, very much appreciated. And I would like to remind everyone to join us again in January. We will be having a presenter by the name of Jeff Ditzenberger from Tugs, speaking to us about men's mental health and self-care. That presentation will be on January 19th, again at 1 o'clock. We hope that you will all be able to join us for that presentation. We hope that you have a happy holiday as well, however you choose to celebrate that, and that you take care, have good health in all ways, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Thanks.